Well, yes, this was bound to come sooner or later. Welcome to F1 Tire Talk with me, Ryan. Tires seem to be a major talking point in pretty much every race, but their definitions change seemingly every weekend, and with the repeated questions I get on the race broadcast streams, I was compelled to make this video. Today we're going over the current tire situation, how we got here, what are the regulations, and what the future will bring for Tire Talk. And if you end up liking the video, consider subscribing. Now let's just dive into it. Formula 1 tires are provided by Pirelli, and starting this past 2020, tire allocations were standardized, meaning every team would get a set number of tires for a specific weekend, with an exact number of every single tire compound, whereas previously, teams would send the amount of each tire desired. The compounds for the 2019, 2020 and 2021 seasons have been named C1, C2, C3, C4 and C5. But what do those mean and where did they come from? Easy, it goes back to the previous system, where Pirelli used to provide the famous, or infamous depending on who you ask, tire rainbow that went from hards to mediums and then soft, super soft and ultra soft, with the super hard and hyper soft compounds added briefly for the 2018 season. But this was just too complicated for many viewers to understand, and seeing as Tire Talk was already rampant on the weekend, they decided to simplify it down a bit. Here's where the current iteration was planned and introduced. The current structure is a way to simplify the terms up front, with apparently only 3 compounds, but if you dig deeper, that's where the remnants of the old system lie. Up front you can only see hards, mediums and softs, but they're actually one of 5 types of tires. The C stands for compound, and then the numbers go from harder to softer, so the C1 is a bit softer than the 2019 hard tire. The C2 is like a medium, the C3 like the soft, the C4 like a super soft, and the C5 is linked to the hyper soft. With the hardest being the most durable but the slowest in lap time, and the softest being the fastest but also the most degrading. And on a given race weekend, Pirelli decide which 3 compounds to run, with the white ones being branded as hard, yellows as medium, and reds as softs. But there's only 3 combinations possible, those being C1, C2 and C3, C2, C3 and C4, C3, C4 and C5, so depending on the weather, track surface and data gathering, they make their choice. Once the tires are selected and given to the teams, that's it. That's all the tires they're gonna get for the given weekend, unless it rains of course. And for 2020, given the current situation, allocations were predetermined for all races as 8 soft sets, 3 medium sets and 2 hard sets per driver, with the intermediate and wet compounds available if needed. This season brought unpredictability and extreme situations, given that the tires were not innovated on since 2019 because it was going to be an interim measure for cost saving, with the intent of making the bigger change for the new regulations that were supposed to come in 21 and the new 18-inch wheels, but with the postponement of the rake change, the tires are going to have to bear through another full season. And that's the main reason for the last-minute regulation changes regarding airflow around the floor, to try to slash aerodynamic performance by around 10% as to not overload the tires like we'd seen, particularly in Silverstone this year. There are also a few commonplace regulations associated with tire usage that pop up every single race weekend, those being: a driver must use at least 1 set of each compound during a race weekend. A driver must start the race in the exact compound they set their fastest lap in Q2 if they get through to Q3, with the exception of rain during either session, or if the compound is destroyed product of an accident or severe flat spotting. A driver must use at least 2 different compounds during a race, which implies a mandated pit stop. Each driver must use only the compounds assigned to them. And finally, a driver cannot run with a mismatched set of tires unless they are all from the same compound and assigned to the same driver. Tyre Blankets are also something that's seen during the weekend, with prominent appearances before each run on qualifying, on the grid and on the pit lane during a race for the subsequent pit stops. Their purpose is not to prevent scuffing, but to keep the tires at an optimal temperature for easier transition for the driver who, instead of having to heat them up to their optimal operating window, they can just roll off the pit lane with full traction. They were going to be banned from 2021 on, but since the regulations have been pushed back a year, so has the ban. There are a few important things that can happen to a tire during a race that can severely impact performance, usually rendering a whole compound useless and forcing a driver to pit. Those are blistering, flatspotting, and delamination. The first one is pretty self-explanatory. Tires are overheated on demanding surfaces with high G-forces, making the rubber boil, allowing for the formation of air pockets, which are almost immediately popped, leaving a hole in the tire. Once this process starts to repeat itself, it can lead to an uneven contact patch with the ground, which can lead to instability. But if the blister expands to form a streak around the whole circumference of the tire, it pretty much evens out and it's good to carry on. but with a higher risk for delamination. Flatspotting is more centered around driver error. With no ABS on the current Formula 1 cars, drivers are trying to brake as much as possible but without locking up the wheels. But if they have to do so corner after corner and lap after lap, a lockup is pretty much inevitable and it scrapes a certain part of the tire, leaving an uneven circumference, and that scraped part is the more prone to scrape even more if another lockup occurs, given that its geometry leads to that particular part catching on the ground. If a flat spot is too deep, it can lead to vibrations, given that the F1 cars lack shock absorbance, which can affect the driver or, as we've seen in the past, can even break suspensions or shake the front wing off entirely. Delamination is the more extreme example of the ones I mentioned so far, and it's usually the product of flatspotting added to blistering or an extreme G-force circuit, and it's the worst case scenario. A slow puncture is salvageable, a flat spot as well, but delamination is the most spectacular of tire failures, and as we've seen time and time again, is when the tire not only punctures but rips, with the main contact patch being detached altogether and the remaining fibers of the tire flinging around, still gripping onto the wheel, and due to centrifugal force act as a soft circular saw, destroying everything it touches, usually the floor, and rendering a car unsalvageable. Once the race ends and all drivers go to the pits, tires may look like this. But don't worry, that's not blistering, that's controlled marble collection. You see, on high-speed corners the tire is deformed and put under so much pressure that bits of it usually fly off and collect outside the racing line. If they are run over, they make the surface of the tire uneven and can severely hinder a car's momentum, so they are avoided during the race, but due to the sheer amount of rubber expelled, drivers are usually told to collect them before coming onto the pit lane after the end of the race, seeing as they can amount to a couple of kilos to an underweight car, be it through the loss of fuel, engine oil, or other factors it might make the difference whether the team is penalized or not. Overall, I think I did a pretty good job covering all the bases here. If you want another introduction to a F1 video, please let me know in the comments what topic you'd be interested in. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, like the video, and subscribe to the channel to support me and the content I make. Also, check out my latest video on the right and a random video on the left. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.